So, good afternoon, everyone. Okay, I'm going to try that again. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, you heard me. My name's Mark Edo, and contrary to what your eyes might tell you, I am in fact a Nigerian, a proud African from Lagos. I'm probably I suppose I'm the lightest Nigerian you've ever seen. We had the richest Nigerian, now you're seeing the lightest Nigerian. And I run a media firm in Nigeria. I'm a former BBC correspondent, and now I run a media firm that links businesses together. So this is an excellent segment, an excellent session for me to do, because this is what I do for a living. And I'm passionate about Africa, and it's great really to be here in this miracle in the desert is the only thing I could call Dubai, really. And to be here with such a fantastic premise that Dubai might become the gateway to Africa. Now, in the course of being asked to do the moderation for this session, I did a bit of thinking about that term gateway and what it really means. And I think really we should focus less on Dubai being the gateway to Africa, and instead think of Dubai as the gateway between Africa and the Middle East, because I think the way that this will really succeed, the way that conferences like this will supercharge the relationship between the Middle East and Africa, is if we think in a quid pro quo, mutually beneficial manner. I envision in a few years walking into a store in the Middle East and looking at African products on the shelves. That's what I dream of. That's our dream as Africans. And so it's a quid pro quo relationship. And I want to talk to my panel about that. Now, we've heard a lot about many of the challenges that we have in Africa. There's no doubt about it. We have great challenges. We've heard about the opportunities that we have in Africa. One of the ways that, as Africans, we can reach for this brand new dawn is for Africans to first think about trading with Africans, about a mutually beneficial intra-regional trading blocks and countries with countries. Now, this is something that every single leader in every single country in Africa has high on its agenda. I just want to read you a quote that I found from The Economist magazine, which is the organizers of this conference. It says, "If aspiring Africa wants a new dream, it should be creating a common market from the Med to the Cape. That would be a boon to trade, enterprise, and manufacturing." Now, I also want to read you a simple and powerful quote. It says, "We must force ourselves to think as a region, plan as a region, aspire as a region, and implement as a region." Now, I didn't say that. He did. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to my panel for this session. To my left is the Vice President of the United Republic of Tanzania, His Excellency Mohamed Garib Bilal. Ladies and gentlemen, give him a round of applause. And to his left, Ambassador Dr. Richard Sezibera, who's the Secretary General of the East African Community, often known as the EAC. And we are so pleased to invite back to Dubai, because I know you were here last year, and it's wonderful to see you again, the Honorable Minister Hannah Teta, who's the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Regional Integration of our cousins in Nigeria, Ghana. Now, I suppose I want to start by asking all of you a very, very simple question, and I'll start with His Excellency the Vice President. As I said, in Africa, we're always talking about interregional. We want to see Nigeria and Kenya doing business. We want to see businesses floating around Africa. There's a lot of rhetoric, but how far is the rhetoric away from the reality from your perspective?
Thank you very much for asking me this question. First of all, I want to say that in Tanzania right now, we have investors from other parts of the continent. For Tanzania, for example, the best and the most biggest investor is from Kenya. Kenya are the main investors in Tanzania. Secondly, also, we are beginning to see other investors coming from West Africa. Alhaji Dangote is there, and many other people are also investing in Tanzania from other countries. South Africa is also investing in Tanzania. So in this regard, we're doing much better than we used to do in the past in terms of thinking, in terms of Pan-African business activities that are taking place right now in our part of the world.
Ambassador Stezibera, the East African community, to many degrees, is sort of leading the charge in the thinking of how to break down these barriers. Just sum it up, crystallize for me where you're at the moment, and I guess how optimistic you are.
Well, I am very optimistic about intra-African trade. We have seen intra-EAC trade grow more than double over the last decade. In fact, in our trade figures for 2012, it grew 29.1%, so that's very fast growth. It currently stands at about 26%, which is much less than where we would like to be, but it's come up from a mere 10% a decade ago. So the prospects are very good. And it's not only the volume of trade among the East African countries that is increasing, it's also the quality of that trade. Whereas East Africa trades with the rest of the world in raw materials, the trade among our countries is on manufactured products. And so there is value addition taking place within East Africa. So it seems to me that looking forward, we must do as much as we can to remove the barriers to trade. Many of them are non-tariff barriers, the simple things that we should continue to do, the removal of roadblocks and other barriers, investments in infrastructure, and a determination to simply facilitate trade by all agencies, the customs people, the standards people, to make sure that goods can move freely within the region. And finally, we need, I think, to invest in making sure that business people can move easily across not only East Africa, but across our continent. We are currently negotiating, as you know, a free trade area between the East African community, SADC, and COMESA, which we hope will expand this market to beyond 140 million people to over 600 million with a GDP of over $1 trillion. And if we do that, this will be a fantastic base for a continental-wide free trade area, which I'm optimistic will also come into place sooner than later.
Minister Teta, this stuff resonates with you, no doubt, so let's go east meets west here. From the ECOWAS region, for example, what progress is being made? And are you happy with year on year? I mean, you were here last year. It's been 12 months now. Is the progress going according to plan, how you hope? And what are the challenges from the West side?
Well, thank you very much. I think that we have made progress, but if you ask me my personal opinion, I would say it's not fast enough.
It's not fast enough?
No. Because at the end of the day, when you're talking about making it easier to do business, remember that people who are doing business want to be able to move their products and services across the different member states as quickly as possible at the lowest possible cost. And so if we understand that this exercise is supposed to be an exercise in facilitation, then the question we should be asking ourselves as governments is, what do we do to facilitate that process? Within ECOWAS, because we've had for a number of years now the free movement of persons, because we are able to move across member states for a period of 90 days without having a visa, that has facilitated, as it were, the building of transport links within ECOWAS. But when it comes to the issues of trade, it's not just a question of moving goods across a border. As important as that is, it's part of the equation. So the infrastructure to make that happen needs to be expanded. But we also need to make sure that the regulations that we have in place are harmonized across our region. Now, what we've been able to do over the last year with the establishment of the common external tariff among ECOWAS states, I think is an important first step, because it harmonizes the customs framework across the ECOWAS region. But you also look at standards. You've also got to look at the financial services sector and the ease of doing business and the ease of facilitating banking transactions. And I think that we have to move from the rhetoric to the detail. Because it is only when we begin to pay attention to the detail and focus on the things we need to get done to make it easier and faster that we will be giving momentum to the whole idea of making inter-African trade a much stronger, larger, and more present reality.
What's the barrier? What are the barriers to that thinking? That sounds obvious, but what is it that's holding us back? Because I hear this a lot, but what are the things that are stopping that?
There are a number of things. When we get into a room as members of government, representing different states, working towards creating frameworks, we don't only come with our national interests, we come with our national lobbies.
Yes.
And so it's important for our national interests and our national lobbies to also see the bigger picture. Because at the end of the day, you can't say in one breath that you want to have integration, and in another breath you want to hold on to certain portions for yourself, or to prevent certain things happening because this is a particular area of business I'm interested in. You've got to have people seeing the bigger picture. That if there is a bigger cake, the chances are that the profits will be larger. And even with your national interest, you might actually find that you have a much bigger regional interest. There are some who see the bigger picture, but I think that we need to carry more of the business community along with us so that we are doing this in tandem.
And one of the people that does see the bigger picture, because you have been, as the Vice President of Tanzania, one of the champions. It's not been an easy job. Regional integration has fallen into your lap, and you're one of those people who has sort of calmed nerves in Tanzania, especially with the concerns about sort of the interests of Tanzania. You've been a champion for inter-regional participation, haven't you? Tell me how passionately you feel about it, some of the nerves that you've had to calm, and how you've done that.
Well, the nice thing about what is happening in Tanzania is that, first of all, in the East African community, we had the East African community many years ago. It broke up, but then we revived it. And we revived it with a lot of anticipation that it will deliver a lot of goods in the future. And actually this has been taking place. The East African community as it stands now is a great compliment to the people of East Africa. People of East Africa who know each other a lot better than I would say before they did. Okay? Because first of all, we speak the same language most of the time. We have a lingua franca Swahili which is spoken across the border. But nevertheless, we have had nice experiences in the past of cooperating in so many areas, in areas of education, transport, communication, and so many areas. We even had East African Airways before. Now, the question is, and the challenge that is facing us, is how to take again from what success stories we had in the past, build on those, and also try to see new areas of cooperation that can take place or that can grow from the previous records that we have achieved so many things in the past.
Your Excellency, I have to put this into context. There was, if I'm not mistaken, the East African community had something that could only be described as a coalition of the willing. And there was some reluctance from the Tanzanian perspective, or there was, let's say there were things that needed to be ironed out before Tanzania's participation in this group. How far has that come? How much progress have you made in that regard?
I think the leaders are taking this issue very seriously.
Yeah.
And for us, we don't see a serious problem because we are governed by a document that has brought us together, the protocols that govern our East African community. And we believe that we should adhere to the protocols as much as possible. And I think with regards to this, we are all speaking the same language. And it's quite possible, indeed, for a segment of the East African community to work together on those areas which are mutually interesting or relevant to them. And this is the so-called the coalition of the willing, which has been transformed now. It is a coalition of something else, not just the willing. But it's a coalition that is supposed to help those people solve the problem that is particularly germane to their areas, and not necessarily involving other countries, other members of the community. In this regard, I think we're doing very well.
Let's look at the bigger picture. Let's crystal ball gaze for a second on what success looks like. Now, from my perspective, I suppose it seems that African governments, the plan is to get your own shop in order, get your own house in order, and then create regional bodies like the EAC, and then eventually those regional bodies would form into a Pan-African body, and then that Pan-African body would connect with the likes of Dubai and other regional entities, and there you would create this real inter-regional market. The problem is there are 14 disparate regional bodies, there are 16 landlocked countries, there is weak governance, you have the issue of corruption at borders, you have all these things that make that beautiful picture look highly unlikely. Now, please reassure us that, first of all, am I getting it right that that's the grand plan for the future? If not, is there another plan? And if it is, how do we reach that promised land? I suppose this has to go to Dr. Sezibera first.
Well, first of all, I think the picture you paint is half right.
Half right.
Half right. It is true that in the past, those issues that you've raised were real issues, and they were a break to the growth of Africa. But now, the continent has a very clear plan. It has a plan, as I said, to form a continental free trade area. And part of that plan is to strengthen regional bodies that form the building blocks, if you will, of the African continent. And this, I think, will happen. Now, so what is happening at regional level is all these countries are coming together. East Africa, as an example, we have a customs union. It's been working since 2005. We have a common market. The countries have just agreed on a 10-year roadmap to a single currency through a monetary union. And then there is shared infrastructure. Countries are cooperating in building the infrastructure they need to spur growth across East Africa. And this is giving results. And the fruits of integration benefit all countries and all sectors. For example, we've seen Tanzania's exports to Kenya have grown 6 times over the last decade or so. Tanzania's exports to Kenya. Kenya is also now Tanzania's second largest investor. So the benefits are to both countries, but even within the countries, they are to the different sectors of society. And so the fears that still exist, and they do still exist, some of them are resistant to facts, but I do think that regional integration is the way to go, because once these countries can trade among themselves, then they can trade meaningfully with the rest of the world. If they can't do it, then they will not be able to compete with the rest of the world.
What does success look like? Success will be when we've been able to have, following on the points that Ambassador just made, effective integration of our regional blocks into the African common market, and to create the continental free trade area. But to do that, we've got to first fine-tune the process of integration within those regional blocks. Because even though we have made progress, I'm sure that we should all be candid enough to admit that there is still progress to be made within the various regional groupings. And it is important to have that negotiation and discussion, helping to integrate the regional groupings, happen now. Because for the targets that we set ourselves for the establishment of the continental free trade area, we haven't yet started doing the hard work that will take us to the CFTA. And if we really mean business about the CFTA, and I think we should take it that we do mean business about the CFTA, then going forward for 2015, the question that should be, or the issue that should be on the top of our minds, is how we begin that discussion between regional groupings to create the framework for establishment of the CFTA. Because while COMESA, SADC, the EAC are talking about their wonderful new free trade area from Cape to Cairo, which is an important part of that building block. If we want to make that continental, as opposed to one half of the continent
Yes.
and not having the other half of the continent as part of that process, then it means that between the ECAS region, the ECOWAS region, and then also the North African states, we've also got to find out how we begin to have that discussion as well.
And is that happening at all? Well, it's happening on this stage right now, I suppose.
Well, it is happening very much within the COMESA, SADC, EAC region. It is not happening in the ECOWAS, ECAS region. And that's the reason why I'm saying that that has to start now. Because if we don't, we certainly are not going to meet the target for the creation of the continental free trade area. And if we miss that target, it's going to be another target that we would have missed and will not allow our external partners to take Africa seriously.
Yes.
Because when we make pronouncements that we say we want to achieve something by a particular time, and we are not seen to be making the efforts to achieve that, then you just have people on the outside looking in and saying, when are these people going to be able to work together to do the things they say they want to do? And so I would say that it's important for us in the process of creating that success to use the opportunity of the next AU meeting, the next AU heads of government meeting that will take place in January, to define in very clear terms what the path to the CFTA looks like month on month until we are able to actualize that vision, so that even if we don't meet the target we've set for ourselves, everybody can see that we are working diligently towards achieving it.
Dr. Sezibera, carrying on from that point, the sense you always get when you read or when you come to conferences like this is exactly as the Honourable Minister said, that trade negotiations drag on, that talk is too slow. I give an example. The EAC, the East African Community in Kenya, have been locked in dialogue with the European Union over a new trade deal to replace the old one for what? How long now? For a long time. 10 years? Maybe 10 years or so. Is it that long?
About 7 years.
7 years. So they've been talking for 7 years on a trade deal that would replace the old one. Meanwhile, the drumbeat of progress is getting louder and louder. I suppose we could take one step back and think, how can we streamline this and get those deals signed, get past the rhetoric stage and into the action stage? I suppose this is something that might keep you up at night, because this is your remit, isn't it, at the EAC?
Yes, now it is true that, that the EAC has been negotiating a new economic partnership agreement with Europe for a long period of time. Now, and we would like this concluded. It would be, conclusion of this deal would be good for both the EAC, it would also be good for Europe. But the mere fact that it's taken 7 years is a reflection of the fact that our community is aware of what her interests are. This would not have happened 10 years ago, because then the relationships were between Europe and our countries were totally unequal, and they could come and give, Europe would come and make unilateral offers. Now they are negotiating their terms of trade with us. So it's been a long negotiation, but that length is a reflection of the strength of the interests on both sides. And so at the end of this process, we will have a very good deal, I believe.
Vice President Bilal, when I first met my compatriot Aliko Dangote, who is sitting right over there, I remember a conversation I had with him about this very subject matter. We were, I think, in London at a Reuters event, and he said that, on stage he said that sometimes I don't know if this is the case now, I hope not, but that it was sometimes easier to take goods, if he was trying to get goods from one place in West Africa to the other, that it was sometimes better to take it out of the continent to bring it back in than it was to take it across the continent or across the region. The infrastructure challenges are tremendous for companies not just like Dangote, but any company that wants to break through borders. infrastructure is a big issue. I'd like you just to tell me from a Tanzanian point of view what you're doing about that and what we can do about that on a broader level.
Well, within the country, we've been addressing that problem for many years right now. And I think we are doing better in terms of connecting the region itself, in terms of connecting Tanzania itself, first of all, internally. We have done a lot to build roads and to create other infrastructure that is necessary for communication, but also for, as well as for people to ferry goods across from one point to another within the country. But within East Africa, again, and even countries close to us in SADC are also doing the same thing. We're working very, very hard to make sure that the railway and the roads are there. The program, the Tanzanian program to build more roads within Tanzania has gone at a very, very hefty speed in recent years. And we can say that within the 30 regions of Tanzania, they are very well connected within Tanzania itself. All the regions are connected with tarmac road all throughout the Tanzanian country. But again, we are doing the same thing to our borders, to our neighbors in the north, to our neighbors in the south, and to our neighbors also across the western part of Tanzania. So on the whole, that we are working on infrastructure to build the roads. We have done very well so far. Our bottlenecks with regards to infrastructure is with the railroad. We don't have a very strong rail network in Tanzania that connects with our neighbors very much. But it's something that is already in the planning, that we shall be planning to build more railways so that we can ferry goods at a cheaper price and much faster than we are doing right now.
Minister Teta, I suppose infrastructure, a huge issue. He's talking about rail, we're talking about road. From the perspective of the ECOWAS region, or at least the very least in Ghana, how are you tackling that, and what are your thoughts in terms of infrastructure and regional trade?
Well, I think infrastructure is a challenge across the continent, but I think it's important for us to look at the specific projects that we want to implement as exactly that, projects. Because very often, when you begin a discussion about the kind of infrastructure that we need, we're very quick to identify that it would be great if we had a new road here, or if we're able to have a deep water port somewhere else, or if we're able to construct a rail line from point A to point B. But in order to get the financing for it, in order to get the public-private partnerships and the investment for it, the imperative, as we see it in Ghana, is to develop clearly those projects, to be able to put together the studies that are required to understand the enormity of the project, the capital that is required, and of course the possibilities for the return on investment. And then to take those projects and to see what you can do as much as possible within a national framework to attract investment into those projects. And where the projects have a broader scope and they are regional projects, to see how best you can work across member states to get that done. For instance, within ECOWAS at the moment, we're talking about the Trans-West Africa Highway. And the part that involves Ghana is the corridor from between Abidjan to Lagos, which will pass through Abidjan, Accra, Lomé, Cotonou, and eventually end up at Lagos, to have a 6-lane highway. Now, if that part of the road is constructed, it's going to facilitate trade across these 4 countries tremendously, because it will make it faster, it will reduce the time of transportation, and it will be a significant development. And we are talking about a 6-lane highway. If you look at the main street in Dubai that we travel on to get here, that's what, a 12-lane or a 14-lane, and that is the city.
It's quite amazing.
And if we're talking about developing trade across the region, we've got to have that kind of vision and put together the planning for those kind of projects to make it happen. I think our biggest weakness is not that we don't know what it is we need, but we haven't done the background work, or enough of the background work, to be able to promote or to look for investment in specifics to be able to achieve greater integration of infrastructure across our region, which is critical to helping to promote trade.
Well, I should mention that you can still send your questions to the panel using the iPads that you have there. So any questions that you have for this panel, zap them along, and if we have time, we'll put them to the panel. We're here in Dubai, as you mentioned, with superhighways. The Dubai has a special economic zone. They've really thought about this deeply. It's in place now. These so-called free zones, special economic zones, have almost there to turbocharge industrial development. What can we as Africans learn as we try to create this intra-regional zone? What can we learn from Dubai's lessons?
Well, there's a lot that we can learn from Dubai. First of all, the managerial skills that they have.
Managerial skills.
That they have regarding the way things are being run here, very efficiently and very impersonal, and things seem to be working very well indeed. Secondly, I think being aware that you have a problem and then being able to solve that problem very fast, not wasting time discussing about these things. How can we find some shortcuts which will enable us to do and implement some projects that we want to be implemented speedily instead of taking a long route to implementation? The other thing that we can learn is how we can attract investment in those areas which we think we need to implement within our country. For that matter, how can we make our places more attractive to investors? What does it take to make sure that the investors are attracted in these particular places? Okay? Obviously, we talk about having friendly business environment that will enable a business entrepreneur to come into our countries and do some investment in this country. But first of all, we must be more receptive, and we must make the environment there more congenial for them to invest, at the same time to try to see that they can benefit from their investment very fast and in a way that will complement both countries, such that we create a win-win situation for the both parties. I think this is very important.
Dr. Sezibera, please, we're here in Dubai. You're having a lot of meetings here, I'm sure, whilst you're here.
Yes.
And you come here often, no doubt.
Yes.
What can we learn from Dubai?
Well, for me, I think there are three key lessons that I pick from Dubai. The first is vision. There's clear vision of where this country wants to be. And it's a vision that is held across governments, business people, everybody you meet. They have a clear vision. The second is the determination to build capacity. Build it or rent it. I am told Emirates, for example, which brings us here, employs probably more Kenyans than Kenya Airways. Yeah? And it's very difficult in our regions to simply allow Africans to come in and work from country to country. So that capacity to bring in talent and rent it if you need to is something that is commendable. And the last one is the discipline to keep working at this vision despite obstacles and make sure that you achieve it. Now, of course, there may be more resources available, but it's not only a resource issue. It is the discipline to keep working at the vision and to achieve it.
Now, I asked for questions, and I got possibly the most interesting one that I've seen so far. And it says, can Africa clone Minister Tete? I think that's the ultimate compliment. But I mean, there's another one here, and I'll pass this one on to you, on fragmentation. What's the best way to look at groups of Africa? Sort of in West Africa we have the Anglophone, the Francophone. So the English versus the French language spoken. And then we've got all these challenges to overcome as well. It leads me on to a point that I was thinking about. In terms of when we think about these things, we always think of them in terms of breaking down barriers, as a policy, as government initiatives to bring in business. But don't we need a wider coalition of the willing to make this happen? Because true integration between trading areas or a Pan-African market will only come when every stakeholder group is included. Everything from civil society to individuals, to SMEs, to everyone. Everybody has to be pulled in to the creation of this market. It's not just a bunch of sort of policy wonks sitting in somewhere deciding something and then informing some captains of industry. Everyone has to be at the table to forge this vision. Is this a discussion that goes on within the EAC, within Tanzania and Ghana, how to bring everybody to the table?
You know, when the Organization of African Unity was formed now over 50 years ago, if my recollection of history is right, the focus was not only on the independence agenda, but on the uniting Africa agenda. And it has been very much a mainstay of discourse over the 50-plus years of existence of the Organization of African Unity, now the African Union. I don't think that there is lack of buy-in for the concept of union or integration. I think the challenge is more in the detail of how we get there. And while we have been focused on the broad picture, we haven't had enough focus on the detail. Now, I agree with you that it is important to have all stakeholders on deck, but that process has to be led by its governments. And that's the reason why the beginning of this discussion, or maybe not the beginning because it began a long time ago, but if you like, the fast tracking of this discussion has to be done by the member states of the African Union and the member states in our continent and at our regional levels. I'm not particularly focused on the Anglophone, Francophone language barriers, because the truth of the matter is that when you look at Africa and you don't look at the languages we acquired from colonialism, but you look at the languages of the African continent, you realize that we are even more diverse than is presented by the Anglophone, Francophone, Lusophone divide. We are a multi-ethnic, multicultural continent. And if we are able to have very clear objectives and a framework for integration, we can overcome those differences.
Who would lead that?
And that process must be led, as I said, by member states within the regional economic groupings, because it's the most efficient way, I think, of dealing with this challenge. And so in practical terms, when we meet again as ECOWAS, it's important for us to say, we know that we have been able to achieve certain things within our region. We have set a timetable for ourselves, which we intend to keep. But we must broaden this discussion outside of ECOWAS and see how we are going to have a firm discussion on this matter also with ECAS, so that we bring on board the Central African states. And then with the EAC, with SADC, with COMESA, because it's important for us to have those discussions going on parallel in order to achieve the integration that we are looking forward to. And I hope that that kind of discussion also happens within these groupings, so that it's not just a question of one region looking to reach out to another, but there is a constructive effort on both sides to begin this process of discussion. Because for us to be able to do this thing as quickly as possible, it is when there are government initiatives, discussions, negotiations ongoing, that you find civil society, you find the business groupings also galvanized into discussing those various points. You talked about the economic partnership agreements. These have been controversial agreements across the continent, but it is the fact that that negotiation started at the government level that galvanized the different sectors of the public to also have their own discussions. And that's the reason why I'm saying that this starts with government.
Now, we had 3 presidents in these very seats just before we sat in them. One of the questions leads on from that, and I guess I'm going to put this to you, Richard. How can we get African leaders to do just that? How can we get them to see the bigger picture, it says, given that strategic vision is a key leadership competency? That's from Smriti Patel in the audience. So I guess that's your job. How do you get them to see the bigger picture?
Well, I actually think the leaders see the bigger picture, at least the ones that I work with. We have seen tremendous improvement in doing business in East Africa because the leaders have determined to facilitate trade, and we've seen transit times drop precipitously from 21 days to transport a container from Mombasa to Kigali, as an example. Used to take 21 days, now takes 6, because the leaders have stood up and decided to lead from Dar es Salaam to Kigali. It's now less than 5 days. So I think the leaders at the continental level see it. The challenge, as Minister Tete says, is to get those people who must do the hard, detailed work of integration, to bring them on board. So the standards bodies, to get them to harmonize standards. And these are thousands of standards. This is not one standard. It's thousands of standards. To get the customs people to harmonize the forms that people use, to get the plant inspectors work together to harmonize, to get the health people harmonize standards and so on. So that is the hard work that is required.
That's the focus.
Yes, and that's where we must focus. It's not so much, the vision is there, the leaders have it, the continent has Agenda 2063, which is very clear, but we must do the hard work that will take us to that vision that our leaders have.
And by God's grace, we will get there. You've been listening to the Honourable Minister, Anna Tete, Ambassador Richard Sezebiba, and the Vice President of Tanzania, Mr. Bilal. Ladies and gentlemen, please give them a warm round of applause for a very interesting segment. Thank you. Now, you have definitely earned lunch. So I'm told that lunch is served in a downstairs restaurant, the Saffron Restaurant. We'll see you back here for the second half of the AGBF. Ladies and gentlemen, lunch is served.